Halloween night. Millwood, a quiet town, lay under the weight of an unnaturally dark sky where the stars had abandoned their posts. Only the pale, thin sliver of the moon hung like a sickle over the rooftops. This Halloween was unlike any other, for this year, with suffering saturating the world, dark things gathered strength. This year, the veil between worlds was so thin it nearly broke, and something ancient, something hungry, waited on the other side. Millwood had always loved Halloween, its streets filled with kids in costumes, parents chatting on doorsteps. But tonight a cold silence swallowed the usual laughter. An icy wind howled through empty streets, extinguishing every jack-o'-lantern one by one. The shadows grew thicker, deeper, writhing like something alive. Sarah Wilson, a mother of two, was putting the finishing touches on her Halloween display when she felt it. A prickle down her spine, a crawling sensation on her skin. She turned and looked out over the empty street, shivering, though she didn't know why. Her porch light began to flicker erratically, casting strange, stretching shadows that didn't belong to anything she could see. When it shattered, she felt her heart skip. She tried to call her husband, but her voice came out weak and distorted, as if someone else was speaking through her. On the edge of town, an old, abandoned house sat decaying in silence. Hollow House, as the townsfolk called it, was a place avoided by everyone. It had been empty for decades, its windows boarded up, its garden overgrown, yet tonight something stirred within its walls. Pale blue lights pulsed from the cracks, casting an eerie glow over the yard. It seemed to breathe, the walls warping and groaning as if the house itself were alive, calling to the shadows. Teenagers dared each other to visit Hollow House every Halloween, and this year was no exception. Timmy and his friends approached it with flashlights in hand, laughing nervously. But the laughter died the moment they stepped onto the property. The door creaked open, inviting them in. Inside it was silent, too silent, a silence that pressed down like a weight on their lungs. Then from the corners of the room, shadows began to emerge, twisting and elongating into grotesque shapes. Limbs stretched too long, jaws unhinged at unnatural angles, eyes gleamed with a dim, hungry light. One by one, the shadows advanced, their twisted limbs reaching, clawing as the boys stumbled backward, their flashlights flickering uselessly. As Timmy turned to run, he felt something cold wrap around his wrist. A long, thin hand with fingers that dug deep into his skin. He screamed, but no sound came out. The shadows dragged him deeper into the house. His friends left frozen, unable to move as they watched him disappear into the walls. His mouth twisted in silent terror. The walls seemed to sigh, absorbing him, leaving only the faintest impression of his face pressed into the wood, eyes wide and empty. Outside, the whole town felt it, doors and windows rattling, lights flickering out, an oppressive weight filling each home. People found themselves trapped, windows refusing to shatter, doors refusing to budge. They could hear whispers through the walls, faint and insidious, like something alive lurking just beyond their reach. The Thompsons tried to huddle together in their basement, hoping to wait out whatever nightmare had descended. But as Mrs. Thompson glanced into the old mirror on the wall, her heart froze. Her reflection had gone pale, eyes sunk into shadows, mouth twisted into a gaping, silent scream. It didn't follow her movements, standing perfectly still as she trembled. Then it grinned, a slow, unnatural smile stretching from ear to ear, whispering in a voice that wasn't hers. "We are here. We have always been here." Outside, dark figures crept along the streets, slipping in and out of shadows, their hollow eyes searching, their twisted, elongated bodies bending at impossible angles. They moved in silence, but their presence filled the air with an unbearable pressure. Every child, every parent, every person in Millwood felt them nearby, felt their hunger. It was as though they were being hunted, and each house was a cage with no escape. As the night wore on, people began to see familiar faces in the reflections of their windows. Faces of loved ones, twisted and monstrous, eyes wide and hungry. Children's toys whispered dark secrets. Shadows gathered in corners, watching, waiting. It was as if the darkness itself had come alive, feeding on every fear, every heartbeat. And then, just before dawn, the hollow house pulsed with a bright, searing light that illuminated the entire town. The shadows retreated, slipping back into the cracks and crevices, leaving only silence in their wake. The doors unlocked, the windows cleared, and the people of Millwood staggered out, shaken and pale, unsure of what had happened. But as they gathered in the morning light, they realized something horrifying. The faces of every missing child were now carved into the trees around the hollow house's lot. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes hollow and staring. The house itself was gone, leaving behind nothing but a dark circular scar in the earth, as if it had sunk back into the ground. But the nightmare was not over. A few days later, Sarah's son Ben was found muttering to himself in the yard, staring into space. When Sarah approached him, he turned to her, his eyes hollow and distant, his voice low and raspy. "They're still here, Mom," he whispered. "They're waiting. They took some of us, but they'll come back. They know our names." And as she held him close, Sarah saw something flicker in the reflection of her kitchen window. There, staring back at her, was her own face, grinning, wide-eyed and empty.